I almost didn't take the rooftop shift that night. My feet were already done from the lunch rush, and my manager Derek had that tight apologetic smile that meant he needed a favor. I said yes. I always said yes. Culinary school wasn't going to pay for itself. The rooftop restaurant at the Callaway filled up fast on Friday nights. It was the kind of place where people came to be seen. Expensive candles, small portions, everyone at the tables with somewhere better to be afterward. I didn't care about any of that. I cared about keeping my section clean and getting home before midnight. But when the elevator doors opened at 8:30, the entire room changed. Not loudly. There was no announcement, but conversations dropped. Waiters near the host stand straightened their backs. Even the pianist stumbled on a note, just one, just barely, and then caught himself like he was embarrassed. A man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit with no tie. His collar open just enough to show the edge of something inked along his neck. A beautiful woman walked beside him. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. I was already moving toward my next table. I had plates to carry and 4 other guests waiting and no time to stand still for anyone, no matter who they were. So I kept moving. I didn't look twice. That, I would later understand, was exactly what changed everything. His name moved through the kitchen like smoke. I heard it from the other servers when I came back to the service station. Kang Min-jae. The words came out in half whispers, the way people talk about things they don't fully understand, but know enough to be careful around. Someone said his family ran things. Another server said, "Don't make eye contact." The senior bartender, Marcus, just dried a glass slowly and said nothing, which told me more than any of the words did. I noted all of it. Then I went back to work. His table was in my section. That was just geography. I didn't choose it, and I wasn't going to trade it away because of rumors. When I arrived with the wine his date had ordered, I kept my movements clean, set it down, offered the pour, smiled the same way I smiled at every table, politely, efficiently, like I had 3 other places to be, because I did. His date watched me with this bright, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked if I always moved that fast. I apologized without apologizing and told her I'd be back to take their food order in a few minutes. When I turned to leave, I felt something. Not a sound, not a touch. Just the particular weight of someone's full attention landing on your back. I kept walking. Whatever it wasn't my business. The drunk investor at the bar grabbed my wrist at 9:15. I was carrying 2 desserts to table 4 and had my back half turned when his hand closed around me. He didn't say anything at first. He just laughed at something his friend said, like my arm was something he'd picked up without thinking. The room saw it. 2 waiters looked away. Marcus made himself very busy with the register. The host stand suddenly needed everyone's attention. I set the dessert plates on the nearest surface. I looked at his hand, then at him. "Please remove your hand," I said. He laughed. He said something about me being too serious for a pretty girl. I was calculating my next move, manager, security, the cleanest exit, when a chair scraped across the floor. Sharp, deliberate. The whole restaurant heard it and went still. Min-jae had stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move toward the man. He just stood there, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. And he said 5 words in a voice so level, it made my skin rise. "You touched what wasn't yours." The investor let go. I turned and looked at Kang Min-jae for the first time. Really looked. His face wasn't angry. It was something worse than angry. It was quiet and certain, the way a storm is certain before it arrives. He wasn't performing protection. He meant it. I didn't know yet what to do with that. The manager appeared from nowhere, smoothing everything over with apologies and comp drinks, and that specific nervous energy that managers get when powerful people are involved. The investor shook. He apologized. He found somewhere else to sit. And I stood there, my dessert plate still in my hands, and I turned to Min-jae and said the thing I was thinking, because I have never been very good at saying anything else. I didn't need saving. The table next to his went quiet. Someone nearby stopped chewing. I watched Min-jae's bodyguard, the large man who had been standing near the wall all evening, go very still. And then Min-jae smiled. It was small. It lasted less than 2 seconds. It barely moved his face. but it was real in a way that nothing else about him had been all night. Unplanned, unguarded, slipping out before he could stop it. I didn't understand why that mattered. I just knew it did. His date saw it too. I watched her eyes move from his face to mine and then back again, doing the math quickly. She picked up her clutch from the table. She folded her napkin. She said something to him too low for me to hear, and then she stood and walked to the elevator with her spine perfectly straight and her expression perfectly controlled. And I was still standing there holding 2 plates of dessert that I had completely forgotten about. Min-jae looked at me once more. Then he looked away. I went back to work. He came back the next night alone. No date, no entourage, just him and one quiet bodyguard who sat at the far end of the bar and watched the room the way security people watch rooms, like everything is a potential problem and nothing is a surprise. Min-jae sat at the bar itself. I saw him when I came out of the kitchen at 7:40, and my stomach did something I told it not to do. I adjusted my apron. I picked up my tray. I reminded myself that he was a guest and I was a server, and those were the only 2 facts that applied here. When his turn came, I asked what he wanted. He said, "Whatever you recommend." "This isn't that kind of bar," I said. "Then pick something anyway." I looked at him for a moment. He didn't look away. He also didn't lean forward or smile or do any of the things men do when they're trying to make something happen. He just waited, like he had all night and would spend it however the next few minutes required. I recommended the aged bourbon. He ordered it. When I brought it back, he said, without any introduction or build-up, "You're the only honest thing in this room." I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Then I said, "You haven't met the chef," and walked away. But for the first time in 8 months of working here, I forgot to check on my next table for almost 4 minutes. The black sedan was parked outside my building when I got home. I noticed it because it didn't belong. My street in the Bronx didn't get cars like that, clean and expensive and idling like they had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to be there. A man in a suit stepped out before I reached my door. He was polite. That was the worst part. His voice was calm and flat, like a person reading from a document. He said that men like Kang Min-jae had a pattern. He said women like me didn't understand what that pattern cost until it was already too late. Then he mentioned my brother Darius's scholarship application. Then my mother's address in Atlanta. Then the culinary school I'd sent 3 applications to over the past 2 years. He said I should stop serving Min-jae's table. He said it like advice. He said it like concern. Then he got back in the car and drove away, and I stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and understood, properly understood, not the whispered kitchen version, exactly what kind of world Kang Min-jae came from. I went upstairs. I didn't call anyone. I sat on the edge of my bed with my coat still on and my bag still on my shoulder, and I made a decision. He came back the following evening. I served every table in my section. I refilled waters. I checked on the kitchen twice when I didn't need to. I kept myself moving and useful and very far from the bar. When he stopped me near the kitchen door, I didn't run. I stopped and looked at him and said it plainly, because plain was all I had left. "Do not come back for me." He studied my face, not my expression, my face like he was reading something underneath the surface. He asked what happened. I told him I wasn't going to explain. I told him that men like him damaged people like me without even meaning to, that it wasn't something he decided. It was just what happened. Gravity, consequence. The way a fire doesn't choose what it burns. I told him to find somewhere else to sit. Then I walked back through the kitchen door and stood beside the walk-in freezer and pressed my back against the cold metal and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. Marcus found me 2 minutes later. He didn't ask questions. He handed me a glass of water and said my foretop was waiting. I went back out. I didn't look at the bar. I heard from the busboy later that Min-jae sat without moving for 20 minutes after I left, and that when he finally stood to go, his hands weren't steady. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about on the train home. 3 days later, my manager told me a man had called asking detailed questions about my schedule. Not Min-jae. Someone else. Someone asking when I arrived, when I left, which subway stop I used, whether I had a regular route home. I knew whose voice had been on that phone. I went to Derek and asked for a week's schedule change, different shifts, different hours. He gave it to me without asking why, which meant he already had a guess. That same night, I looked up everything I could find about the Kang family. I'd been avoiding it because knowing more would make it harder to be calm, and I needed calm. But I needed information more. What I found took me an hour to get through. Businesses, properties, a real estate empire that sat on top of something older and darker, the way old buildings sit on old foundations. The family had been in organized crime for 2 generations. Min-jae was the only son. He had been expected to inherit all of it since he was old enough to attend meetings. I thought about his face when he smiled. I thought about how it lasted less than 2 seconds and still felt like the most undefended moment I'd seen from another person in years. Then I thought about my mother's address being in a stranger's mouth on a Tuesday night. I closed my laptop. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. The text came from a number I didn't recognize, on a Thursday at 4 a.m. 2 words first, "You're safe." Then a second message, a few seconds later with a document attached. A series of legal filings, business dissolutions, asset transfers, the kind of paperwork that meant something large had been deliberately taken apart. I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent enough time trying to understand contracts for my culinary school applications to know what severance looks like. Half of what I'd read about the Kang Empire 3 nights ago was already gone. I sat up in bed in the dark and read through the documents 3 times. Darius knocked on my door at 7. He's 19 and picks up on things I don't say. He came in without asking, looked at my face, and sat down on the floor with his back against my bed frame, the way he used to when we were kids, and something had scared us. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He said, "Nia, what did you get into?" I said, "I don't know yet." He sat with me until my alarm went off for work. I went to the restaurant that morning not knowing what to feel, because what Min-jae had dismantled wasn't just paperwork, it was leverage. It was the foundation of everything his family had built. And he had burned it, and all I had to explain why was a text message and 4 words at 4 in the morning. He walked in at 7:30 on a Friday evening, and I almost didn't recognize him. No tailored suit, no bodyguard hovering at the edge of the room. He wore a plain dark coat, and he looked tired in a way that money usually covers up, but couldn't this time. He sat at the bar and waited. I walked over. He said, "I gave it up." I looked at him. I didn't say anything. He reached into his coat and slid a small folder across the bar. I opened it slowly. More documents, cleaner this time, organized, his name on top of each page. Official withdrawals, a letter from a firm in Seoul. A transfer of his personal accounts. "All of it?" I asked. "Enough that it can't come back," he said. He looked at me steadily. "You were right. I was dangerous to know. I didn't want to be anymore." He closed the folder. He pushed back from the bar. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "I wanted you to know it wasn't nothing, that you weren't nothing." He stood up, and I thought about a text at 4 in the morning. I thought about 2 seconds of a real smile. I thought about a man whose hands shook after I walked away. "Wait," I said. He stopped. We walked for 2 hours. No destination, just Manhattan around us, cabs, corner stores, the smell of rain that had come just before we left. He talked slowly, the way people do when they haven't shared anything in a long time. He described growing up inside his father's world. Decisions always already made. His whole life spent being useful to something that never once asked what he wanted. No self-pity, just facts, stated plainly, like weather. I told him about the first time I made my grandmother's jerk chicken and burned every piece so badly the smoke alarm went off twice. I told him I cried in the kitchen, something I'd never told anyone, and then made it again the next day, and the next, until I got it right. "Is that when you decided to become a chef?" he asked. "No," I said. "I decided when I realized I wasn't going to let the burning stop me." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, fully, completely, in a way I hadn't seen before. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, like someone who might have been entirely different in a different life. We were under a streetlight when it happened. Rain fell soft and cold around us. Neither of us moved away. Across the street, a car sat idling. I didn't notice it. I was too busy figuring out what to do with what was happening in my chest. I was taken before sunrise. I want to be clear about that part because it still doesn't feel real when I say it. I was taken. Two men, a car. My block at 5:30 in the morning, when the only people out are the ones going to early shifts and the ones coming home from long nights. They didn't hurt me. They were almost apologetic about it, which was its own kind of frightening. They brought me to a house, large, controlled, the kind of quiet that costs money, and they left me in a clean room with a window that looked out onto a garden and said someone would come speak to me shortly. Chairman Kang was not what I expected. He was shorter than his son, older than his photographs. He sat across from me with perfect posture and explained, without cruelty, that Min-jae had made an emotional decision and that emotional decisions had consequences for families like his. He said if Min-jae came home, fully home, back to the structure, back to the plan, I would be returned safely and left entirely alone. My brother, my mother, my applications, all untouched. He said, he will give up a great deal for you. I am asking you to decide if you are worth that cost. And I sat in that chair in that quiet room and felt something settle inside me. Not fear, something closer to clarity. They didn't lock the door. I think Chairman Kang believed that was enough. The weight of the situation, the size of the house, the fact that I was 24 with no connections and no plan. I think he believed women like me didn't move against men like him. He was wrong about that. I spent 45 minutes locating the kitchen. Another 10 finding what I needed. I have spent 6 years learning how to work in professional kitchens, how to move efficiently, how to think 3 steps ahead, how to stay calm when things go wrong. It turns out those skills transfer. I won't explain exactly what I did. I'll just say that when I walked into the estate's main dining room at just past 7 in the morning, Chairman Kang and Min-jae were already there, facing each other across a long table. Min-jae looked like he hadn't slept. His father looked like he never needed to. They both stopped when they saw me. Min-jae said my name like it was a question. I ignored him and looked at his father. He already chose, I said. I came to tell you that I'm choosing too. The room was very quiet. I walked to Min-jae and took his hand. His father didn't speak. He didn't stop us. He just watched with the expression of a man who has finally encountered a variable he didn't account for. We walked out together. No one followed. 8 months later, I opened the restaurant. Small, 14 tables. A kitchen I designed myself, down to where every shelf sat and how the light fell over the prep station. The name above the door was simple. Carter's. My name. My work. 3 years of double shifts and saved tips and applications and burned chicken and starting over. The night before opening, I stood in the empty dining room at midnight and let myself feel the weight of it. I called my mother. I called Darius. I cried the way you cry when you're not scared but grateful, a completely different kind of crying. Min-jae spent those 8 months rebuilding quietly. Not in crime, something slower and harder, legitimate property consulting, starting at the bottom of an industry he'd only ever seen from the top. He made mistakes. He told me about them without being asked. He learned that not controlling everything was survivable, which was something no one had ever taught him. He didn't ask to be part of Carter's. He just showed up, fixed things when they broke, learned which suppliers were reliable, sat in the corner booth after closing and listened while I talked through problems, without trying to solve them before I finished speaking. Opening night was full. I looked across the dining room and he was already watching me, the same quiet, careful attention as that first night on the rooftop. Except now he didn't look like a man keeping a secret. He looked like a man who had finally found solid ground. After the last guests left, I made one more plate. Burnt honey tart. I put it on the menu because it was the dish that taught me burning something isn't the end, that sometimes the char is the flavor, that some things need heat to become what they were meant to be. I brought it to his table and sat across from him. He looked at the plate, then at me. You made this tonight, he said. I made it for you, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then I asked the thing I had been carrying since the beginning, the thing I never said out loud because real things can be taken from you. Did you really smile because of me that first night? Or was it just the moment? He looked at me in that steady, unhurried way of his. No, he said. I blinked. He leaned forward, just slightly. The candle between us made everything warm and close. I smiled because for the first time in my life, he said softly, I saw home walking toward me. The restaurant was empty. The city hummed outside. I sat across from a man who had burned down an empire and built himself back up from the ash. And I understood that we had both gone through fire and come out changed on the other side. I reached across and took his hand, not to stop him from leaving, to tell him he could stay.